The autumn wind swept across the Nebraska plains, carrying with it the scent of dying corn and the promise of a harsh winter ahead. Maria Esperanza clutched her worn leather satchel as she stood beside the wooden fence of the Hartwell Ranch, watching her employer, Mrs. Catherine Hartwell, negotiate with a grizzled cattle rancher named Buck Morrison. "She's been with us for 3 years," Mrs. Hartwell said, her voice carrying the clipped tone of someone accustomed to making difficult decisions. "Speaks perfect English, works from dawn to dusk, and never complains. She's worth more than what you're offering." Buck Morrison spat into the dust and adjusted his weathered hat. The year was 1934, and the Great Depression had turned human dignity into a commodity to be bartered. His 2 oxen, massive beasts named Thunder and Lightning, stood patiently behind him, their breath forming small clouds in the crisp October air. "Lady, times are tough all round," Buck replied, his weathered hands gesturing toward the animals. "These oxen are prime stock. They can plow a field faster than any tractor you can't afford, and they don't need gasoline. You're made for my oxen. It's a fair trade in these times." Maria felt her heart sink as she listened to the conversation. At 22, she had come to America from Mexico, with dreams of building a better life. Instead, she found herself being traded like livestock. Her dark eyes welled with tears, but she blinked them away. Crying wouldn't change her circumstances. Mrs. Hartwell glanced at Maria with a mixture of guilt and resignation. The ranch was failing, and her husband had died the previous spring, leaving her with debts that seemed insurmountable. "Maria," she called out, her voice softer now. "Come here, child." Maria approached slowly, her worn boots making soft sounds against the packed earth. The October sun cast long shadows across the ranch yard, and she could hear the distant lowing of cattle and the creaking of the old windmill. "Buck here has offered to take you on as help for his ranch," Mrs. Hartwell explained, though they all knew it wasn't really an offer. "You'll have a place to stay, food to eat, and work to do. In these times, that's more than many people have." Maria nodded, understanding the unspoken truth. She was being sold to pay debts, her years of loyal service reduced to a transaction between desperate people. "Yes, ma'am," she whispered, her accent lending a musical quality to her words despite the circumstances. Buck Morrison looked uncomfortable for a moment, perhaps realizing the weight of what he was doing. "Girl, you'll be treated fair," he said, gruffly. "My ranch ain't fancy, but you'll have a roof over your head and 3 meals a day. That's more than some folks can promise right now." The handshake between Mrs. Hartwell and Buck sealed Maria's fate. As she gathered her few belongings, a change of clothes, a small wooden cross her grandmother had given her, and a photograph of her family in Guadalajara, she couldn't help but wonder what kind of life awaited her at the Morrison Ranch. Thunder and Lightning seemed to sense the solemnity of the moment. The massive oxen, usually docile and obedient, shifted restlessly as Buck prepared to lead them away with their human cargo. Their dark eyes, intelligent and knowing, seemed to watch Maria with an understanding that transcended species. As the small procession prepared to leave the Hartwell Ranch, Maria took one last look at the place that had been her home for 3 years, the white farmhouse with its wraparound porch, the red barn where she had helped deliver calves, the garden where she had grown vegetables to supplement their meager meals. All of it was now part of her past. "Come on then," Buck said, not unkindly. "It's a 2-hour ride to my place, and I want to get there before dark." Maria climbed onto the wooden cart, her satchel clutched tightly in her lap. Mrs. Hartwell watched from the porch, her hand raised in a gesture that was part farewell, part apology. As the cart began to move, pulled by Thunder and Lightning, Maria felt the weight of uncertainty settling over her like the approaching Nebraska winter. The oxen, however, had other plans. They had traveled less than a mile from the Hartwell Ranch when Thunder and Lightning began to show signs of distress. What started as occasional snorting and head shaking quickly escalated into something more dramatic. The massive oxen, who had been perfectly obedient for years, suddenly planted their hooves in the dusty road and refused to take another step. "What in the Sam Hill?" Buck muttered, climbing down from the cart. He approached Thunder, the larger of the 2 oxen, and tugged at the harness. The animal's response was immediate and unmistakable, a low, rumbling bellow that seemed to come from the depths of his massive chest. Maria watched from the cart as Buck tried everything he could think of. He offered the oxen water from his canteen, checked their hooves for stones, and even attempted to coax them forward with a handful of grain from his pocket. Nothing worked. If anything, the animals seemed to become more agitated with each passing moment. "They've never done anything like this," Buck said, frustration evident in his voice. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool autumn air. "These animals have been working for me for 5 years. They're steady as sunrise." Lightning, the slightly smaller but more spirited of the pair, began to paw at the ground, sending up small clouds of dust. His massive head turned toward Maria, and for a moment, she could have sworn she saw something almost human in his dark eyes, a look of recognition, perhaps even sympathy. The afternoon sun was beginning to sink lower in the sky, casting longer shadows across the Nebraska landscape. In the distance, Maria could see other farms and ranches scattered across the rolling hills, smoke rising from their chimneys as families prepared for the evening meal. She wondered if any of those families were struggling with the same desperate choices that had led to her current situation. "Maybe they're sick," Maria suggested quietly, speaking for the first time since leaving the Hartwell Ranch. Her voice carried a note of genuine concern for the animals. Buck wiped his brow with his sleeve and shook his head. "Nah, they're healthy as horses. Ate their breakfast just fine this morning, and they were pulling my plow without any trouble yesterday." He paused, studying the oxen with a puzzled expression. "It's like they're protesting something." As if to confirm his words, Thunder let out another bellow, this one even more forceful than the first. The sound echoed across the empty landscape, and Maria felt a strange chill run down her spine. She had worked with animals all her life, and she had never seen anything quite like this. "Let me try," Maria said, surprising herself with her boldness. She climbed down from the cart, her worn dress rustling in the autumn breeze. Buck looked skeptical but stepped aside. "Go ahead, girl, can't hurt to try." Maria approached Thunder. Slowly, her hands extended palm up in a gesture of peace. She began to speak in Spanish, her voice soft and melodic. "Hola, mi amigo. ¿Qué pasa? ¿Por qué estás tan triste?" The massive ox turned his head toward her, his ears pricked forward. With interest, Maria continued to speak, her words flowing like a gentle stream. She told Thunder about her own fears, about leaving the only home she had known in America, about the uncertainty that lay ahead. "I know you don't want to be part of this," she whispered, switching back to English but maintaining the same gentle tone. "I don't want to be part of it either. But sometimes we don't get to choose our path." Lightning had stopped pawing at the ground and was now watching the interaction between Maria and his companion with what appeared to be intense interest. The three of them, woman and 2 oxen, seemed suspended in a moment of mutual understanding. "They know," Maria said suddenly, turning to Buck with wide eyes. "They know what happened back there. They know I was traded for them, and they don't like it." Buck scoffed, but his expression was uncertain. "Animals don't think like that. They're just being stubborn." But even as he spoke, Thunder took a step backward, pulling against the harness. Lightning followed suit, and soon both oxen were backing the cart toward the direction they had come from. "Well, I'll be damned," Buck muttered. "In all my years of working with livestock, I've never seen anything like this." The sun was sinking lower now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. In the distance, Maria could see the lights beginning to flicker on in the windows of the Hartwell Ranch. The familiar sight made her heart ache with a homesickness she hadn't expected to feel so soon. Thunder and Lightning continued their backward march, their massive shoulders straining against the harness as they pulled the cart back toward the ranch. Buck walked alongside them, shaking his head in disbelief and muttering under his breath about stubborn animals and impossible situations. Maria remained silent, but inside her heart, a small flame of hope had begun to flicker. Perhaps this strange rebellion of the oxen was a sign that her story wasn't over yet. Perhaps there was still a chance for a different ending to this dark chapter of her life. As they approached the gates of the Hartwell Ranch, Maria could see Mrs. Hartwell standing on the porch, her hand shading her eyes as she peered into the gathering dusk. The expression of surprise on her face was evident even from a distance. The oxen, as if sensing they had reached their destination, finally came to a stop in the exact spot where the transaction had taken place. Less than 2 hours earlier, Mrs. Catherine Hartwell hurried down from the porch, her skirts rustling. As she approached the peculiar scene, the lamplight from the house cast a warm glow across the yard, creating dancing shadows that seemed to mirror the confusion on everyone's faces. "What on earth?" she exclaimed, looking from Buck to Maria to the obviously agitated oxen. "Why are you back? Did something happen?" Buck removed his hat and ran his fingers through his graying hair. "Ma'am, in 30 years of working with cattle and oxen, I've never seen anything like this. These animals flat out refused to leave your property. They pulled the cart back here against my wishes." Thunder let out a low, rumbling sound that was almost conversational in tone, as if he were trying to explain himself. Lightning nodded his massive head, a gesture so human-like that it made Maria's breath catch in her throat. Mrs. Hartwell approached the oxen cautiously, her expression thoughtful. "They've been coming to our ranch for years," she said slowly. "Every time Buck needed to borrow our breeding bull, these two would make the trip. They know this place, but they know my ranch too." Buck protested. "They live there. This doesn't make any sense." Maria, who had been quietly observing the exchange, stepped forward. "Mrs. Hartwell," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "may I speak with you privately?" The older woman nodded, and they walked a few steps away from Buck and the oxen. In the lamplight, Maria could see the lines of stress and worry etched deeply into Mrs. Hartwell's face. The past year had aged her considerably. "I know you feel bad about what happened today," Maria began, her words careful and measured, "and I know you didn't want to do it, but I also know you're desperate." Mrs. Hartwell's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Maria, you have no idea how sorry I am. When my husband died, he left debts I never knew about. The bank is threatening to foreclose. I thought if I could get Buck's help with the heavy work, maybe I could save the ranch." "What if there was another way?" Maria asked gently. "What if instead of trading me away, we worked together to save this place?" Mrs. Hartwell looked confused. "I don't understand. What could we possibly do? I can't afford to pay wages, and the ranch needs more help than just the two of us can provide." Maria glanced back at Thunder and Lightning, who were standing peacefully now, as if they were waiting for something. "Those oxen are worth a lot of money, aren't they?" "Well, yes. Buck values them at about $200 for the pair. That's why he was willing to make the trade. But what if we didn't need to own them? What if we could use them?" A spark of understanding began to flicker in Mrs. Hartwell's eyes. "You mean rent them?" "Exactly. Buck gets to keep his oxen. You get the heavy labor you need for the ranch. And I," Maria paused, gathering her courage, "I stay here and help you run this place. We split the profits when we start making money again." Mrs. Hartwell stared at Maria for a long moment. "You would do that? After what I almost put you through today? This is my home," Maria said simply. "I've put 3 years of my life into this place. I've helped birth calves, tended the garden, and kept the house running. I'm not ready to give up on it." They walked back to where Buck was waiting, still looking perplexed by his oxen's behavior. The animals had settled down completely now, occasionally glancing toward the women as if they were following the conversation. "Buck," Mrs. Hartwell said, her voice stronger now than it had been all day, "I have a different proposition for you." Buck looked skeptical. "Ma'am, we already made a deal." "Hear me out," Mrs. Hartwell continued. "What if you kept your oxen, but rented them to me for the heavy work, say 3 days a week during planting and harvest seasons, and as needed the rest of the year? I'd pay you in produce and a percentage of our profits." Buck considered this for a moment, his weathered face thoughtful. "And what about the girl? Maria stays here as my partner. We work together to save this ranch." The word partner hung in the air between them, revolutionary in its implications. In 1930 for Nebraska, the idea of a Mexican maid becoming a business partner with a white ranch owner was almost unthinkable. But desperate times had a way of making the impossible seem reasonable. Buck looked at his oxen. who were now grazing peacefully in the ranch yard as if they belonged there. "Well," he said slowly, "I reckon if Thunder and Lightning approve of the arrangement, who am I to argue?" Thunder lifted his massive head and looked directly at Buck, then at Mrs. Hartwell and Maria. For a moment, it seemed as if the animal was actually considering the proposal. Then he let out a gentle lowing sound that could almost be interpreted as agreement. "It's settled then," Mrs. Hartwell said, extending her hand to Buck. "Partners in saving this ranch." As they shook hands, Maria felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in months, it held the promise of hope rather than just survival. Thunder and Lightning seemed to sense the change in the atmosphere. They moved closer to Maria, and she reached out to stroke Thunder's massive neck. His skin was warm and solid under her touch, and she whispered a quiet gracias that only the oxen could hear. The autumn stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and the lamplight from the house painted everything in shades of gold and amber. It was a new beginning, born from the wisdom of two oxen who had refused to be part of an injustice. 3 months later, the first heavy snow of winter blanketed the Nebraska landscape, transforming the Hartwell Ranch into a scene from a postcard. Inside the warm kitchen, Maria stirred a pot of beef stew while Mrs. Hartwell, Catherine, as she now insisted Maria call her, worked on the ranch's account books at the worn wooden table. "The grain harvest brought in more than we expected," Catherine said, looking up from her calculations with a smile. "And Buck's arrangement has worked out better than I could have hoped. His oxen have helped us clear and plow twice the acreage we managed last year." Maria smiled as she ladled the stew into bowls. The relationship between the two women had evolved from employer and employee to something resembling sisters, bound together by shared struggle and mutual respect. The transformation hadn't been easy. There had been difficult conversations about money, responsibility, and the social expectations of their small Nebraska community. But they had worked through each challenge together. "The neighbors are talking," Catherine continued, her tone matter-of-fact rather than worried. "Mrs. Peterson at the general store asked me yesterday if it was true that I'd made you a business partner." "And what did you tell her?" Maria asked, setting the bowl of stew in front of Catherine. "I told her it was the smartest business decision I'd ever made." The sound of heavy footsteps on the porch announced Buck's arrival for their weekly dinner and planning session. The arrangement had grown beyond just renting the oxen. Buck had become an informal advisor to their operation, helping them plan crops and manage livestock. "Evening, ladies," Buck said as he knocked the snow off his boots before entering. "Thunder and Lightning are bedded down nice and warm in your barn. They seem to like it here better than my place these days." It was true. The oxen had become permanent residents of the Hartwell Ranch, though they technically still belonged to Buck. They had adapted to the arrangement with the same mysterious wisdom they had shown on that fateful October day when they refused to participate in Maria's trade. "How are the cattle looking?" Catherine asked as Buck took his usual seat at the table. "Strong and healthy. That new feed mix Maria suggested has made a real difference." "Where did you learn about cattle nutrition, girl?" Maria blushed slightly. "My father raised cattle in Mexico before we lost our farm. I watched and learned." Over dinner, they discussed plans for the spring planting, the possibility of expanding their cattle herd, and the loan payment that was due to the bank in March. The numbers were tight, but they were manageable, a far cry from the desperate situation Catherine had faced just a few months earlier. "I've been thinking," Buck said as he pushed back from the table. "You two have turned this place around in just 3 months. Word's getting around about your success. Other ranchers are starting to ask questions about your methods." "What kind of questions?" Maria asked, the kind that might lead to more business. "Consulting work, maybe. Helping other folks who are struggling like Catherine was." Catherine and Maria exchanged glances. They had been so focused on saving their own ranch that they hadn't considered the possibility of helping others in similar situations. "We'd need to be careful," Catherine said thoughtfully. "We can't take on more than we can handle. But we could help," Maria added. "There are so many families struggling right now. If we can share what we've learned, Buck nodded approvingly. That's the spirit. Success ain't worth much if you don't use it to help your neighbors. As the evening wound down and Buck prepared to leave, he paused at the door. You know, he said, I never did figure out why thunder and lightning acted the way they did that day. It was like they knew what was right before the rest of us did. Maria looked out the window toward the barn where the oxen were sleeping. Maybe they just understood that some things are more valuable than money, like dignity, like partnership, like home. Catherine nodded slowly. I think they saw something in us that we didn't see in ourselves yet. The potential for something better. After Buck left, the two women sat in comfortable silence by the fire, each lost in their own thoughts. The wind howled outside, but the house was warm and secure. The ranch that had once seemed doomed was now thriving, and their partnership had become the foundation for a future neither of them could have imagined. Maria, Catherine said quietly, I need to ask you something. Do you ever regret staying? Do you ever wonder what might have happened if you'd gone with Buck that day? Maria considered the question carefully before answering. I think about it sometimes, she admitted. But then I remember what thunder and lightning taught us, that sometimes the best path forward is the one where nobody gets left behind. Outside in the barn, Thunder stirred in his sleep, as if he had heard his name on the wind. Lightning shifted beside him, and for a moment, both oxen lifted their heads toward the house where warm light glowed in the windows. The maid who had almost been swapped for two oxen had instead become a partner in building something lasting and meaningful, and the oxen who had refused to move had, in their stubborn wisdom, moved 3 lives toward a better future. The Nebraska wind continued to blow across the plains, carrying with it the promise of spring and new beginnings. In the morning, there would be work to do, challenges to face, and a future to build together. But tonight, there was warmth, partnership, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that sometimes the most unlikely alliances can change everything. The story of the maid and the oxen would be told in the community for generations to come, not as a tale of near tragedy, but as a testament to the power of recognition, respect, and the courage to choose a better path when it presents itself, even if it comes in the most unexpected form.